Before the cities and governments, written language, before nations, temples, churches, there were families. And the family is the most important institution in the world. Because if the home goes, the nation is going to go. The home is a basic unit, and the home cannot be separated from the health of the nation or of the province. Many today are wringing their hands with fear and insecurity. But more important than what happens at Wall Street or what happens at the United Nations is what is happening to our families. In the home, character is formed. Integrity is born. Values we live by are made clear. Goals are set. Attitudes are formed that last a lifetime. Is your home built on a solid foundation?
Woohoo! So good. Hey, that is words of wisdom that last a lifetime. So this morning we're just going to have a mini sermon, and those who normally sit through them right now, just restrain yourself. Don't laugh. We're going to have a mini sermon. I promise, because we sugared up the kids ahead of time. So it is necessary that we have a mini sermon. But for the kids, if you have like a paper and a pen or whatever, if you don't, you could grab the little offering envelope in front of you, and there's usually a pen there. But for the kids under 12 years old, we have a code word thing for you. So you're going to be listening for how many times I say the code word. And at the end of it, Auntie Beth is counting. And I'm not as confident that she's going to count the same as you, but we're pretty sure. And she can ask a friend, so she can get a consensus if she wants. And at the end, the two kids under 12 and under, the two fastest to the front with the right answer get one of these lovely hoodies, which is so nice. So good incentive to listen, right? So your word that you are listening for is generation. Generation. And so all the kids are, what? No, we didn't start you. That wasn't it. Everybody's like 3. She said it 3 times already. No, generation. And we're going to do a whole talk about this, so there's going to be a lot. So kids, you got your pens ready. You're counting and listening. And adults, the good stuff's in between. So, starting now. All right, so this weekend, how many know what Monday's holiday is tomorrow? I mean, basically, it's the Lake Day, but it's Heritage Day is what the official title is for Alberta. Heritage Day, which is a day dedicated to celebrating our country's diverse cultural heritage and history. In other words, it is about celebrating our roots, where we come from, what we're about. It's about celebrating who we are. So today we want to talk about that briefly and how we become who we are and how that is affected by the things of God. And so we're wanting to see how my decisions might affect the generations behind me. How the generations are impacted by what I do, by what I say, by how I act, and how the foundation of God might change that. There's 3 key things that happen in valuing God in family and how it affects us. One of them is there's an introduction to God that most effectively comes through the family. There is intention or intentionality that is applied to kids, to extended family in this way. And then there is an inheritance of faith that we can walk into that changes the course of our life, changes maybe the trajectory or the path that we're on. And so when we look at this, when I look around this room, and I just love the diversity. I love how people have come from all over the places, all different kind of backgrounds, and we hear each other's stories, and sometimes we think, well, I thought I was normal, but maybe yours is normal, so what is normal? I don't know what's normal. I don't know where I should be. I don't know where I should come from. The reality is your family life is a foundation for you. Your upbringing is a foundation. Some had really easy ones. Some had really messy ones. But all of us can change it or establish it from this point forward. We can decide what happens in my generation and the generations to come. I can decide what's happening there. So when we look at this, we understand that God actually designed family. He instructs us in family. When we meet the God of the Bible, we find the God who is introducing himself in a family kind of way. And there's scriptures about it. When God introduced himself to Moses, and Moses was supposed to go back and talk to the children of Israel about who God is, and God's like, I don't know what to tell them. They've grown up on the gods of Egypt. They know the Hebrew God. They know some stuff, but they've been so inundated with so many different things. What am I supposed to tell them? And in Exodus 3:14 and 15, it says, God said to Moses, I am who I am. Well, that's a good start. Moreover, God said to Moses, thus you shall say to the children of Israel, the Lord God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and this is my memorial to all generations. So he starts off with saying, I am who I am. I am God. I'm the only God. There are no other gods besides me. I'm it. But if you want them to understand, tell them, I'm the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. In other words, when you look at the history behind you, when you see what happened in the previous generations, you see that there is 1, 2, 3 different generations that experience God, and in the fullness of their picture, you get a far better picture of who God is than just in one. So God's like, explain it to them this way. I'm the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. When we get to see God played out from one generation to the next generation to the next generation, we see this picture of grace and kindness and love and mercy. We see what it looks like to have God's hand bless your family line. We see things like the hard stuff begin to drop off. We see things become purer. We see things become healthier. And some of us, we're in the first generation. This is meant to be encouraging today. We don't want to go, well, wow, my background set me up to fail. No, today's the start then. Today's the start. This is the beginning. God is going to build something in you that will pass on and pass on and pass on. And every generation has to make their own decision for God. But they get a head start when it's handed to them well, right? When it's modeled for them well, when they experience the goodness of God well. And so the second thing that we want to talk about is the intention of passing on this gift of faith, the intention of leading our children in the things of God. It's so interesting when you look at the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, because Abraham had this encounter with God. He talked with God. He walked with God. He had conversations with God. But Isaac kind of inherited a blessing. Isaac inherited the things that Abraham labored for and received by faith. But by the time it got to Jacob, Jacob was questioning. Like, is it true? Is it really true? Because he was mishandled by his father. There was a weird family dynamic there where his dad loved the other brother more and his mom loved him more, and it was weird family stuff. And so when Jacob came along and he had to decide what was right for his life, we know that the story of Jacob is Jacob actually had to wrestle with God. But he came back to the same conclusion that his grandpa had. He had an anchor on the inside that kept pulling him back to at least ask the question. See, sometimes we feel like, well, my kids or my grandkids, they're not serving God right now, but they have an anchor. They have something. If you've spoken to them, you've modeled for them, you've poured into them the life of Jesus, the value of faith, they've got something that at some point they will wrestle through. And so God tells us these specific things like Proverbs 22:6 in the Amplified. And most of us can quote this super well. Train up a child in the way he should go, and in keeping with his individual gift or bent. And when he is old, he will not depart from it. In other words, when we train up, we look at each kid and we go, okay, how do you need to hear God? What's it going to take for you to encounter God? How can I model God for you? Sometimes it's not just the constant talking. Sometimes it's the showing of what life and love looks like, what God really looks like. It's training up our kids in the way that God made them to be. One of the other versions says, train up a child in the way he should go, teaching him to seek God's wisdom and will for his abilities and talents. It's teaching your kids that thing that God put in you, you are unique and you are designed by God. You're made by him, for him. So let's ask him how to develop this. Let's see what he put in you for his glory, because this is going to be the best way for you to experience life. We were reading in our house this last little while, going through Judges and whatever, and Wayne was like, something I had never really paid attention to, the story of Samson that we find in Judges 13 to 15. And the story of Samson is that there's a time that comes that the nation needs a voice, somebody who can stand, somebody that can lead. And there's this couple that have not been able to have kids, and an angel of the Lord comes and he gives the word that you're going to have a kid. And this kid is going to be the one who's supposed to lead Israel. And this is how you're going to raise them. And this kid needs to, not cut his hair and not drink wine and not do the stuff. Otherwise, he needs to be, in other words, he needs to be dedicated to God. It's kind of a Nazirite thing. And so lots of us know the story of Samson and, the haircut that just went so bad. Most of us have had a bad haircut, but that was the worst in history ever. But prior to that, Samson comes and he has, the reason his hair was a big deal was because God had said, it's an indicator of the relationship that I have with him and the calling upon his life. And so it says, interestingly, that the wife comes and tells her husband, this is what the angel of the Lord said to me, and this is what he said we're supposed to do. And he said, we need to pray and we need to ask that he'll come and tell us again. So Judges 13:8, he begins to engage, and it says, Manoah prayed to the Lord and said, oh my Lord, please let the man of God whom you sent to us again come and teach us what we shall do for the child who will be born. Which is interesting. He's not just like, yes, we're finally going to have a son. He says, ask that God would come and tell us again, what is it we're supposed to do for him? And then he's more specific, goes on in verse 12, and it says, Manoah said, when the angel came back, Manoah said, now let your words come to pass. What will be the boy's rule of life and his work? Isn't that an interesting question? He doesn't just say, how do we keep him not doing bad things? But he asks, what are the right things he should be doing? Isn't that wild? Like moms and dads, you want to pass faith from one generation to the next generation. You want to make sure that you are asking God who he made them to be. And it's not just the faith of my grandpa is just something I take blindly, but I experience him in my life. I experience him in my giftings. I experience him in the things that I'm passionate about. It gets passed on intentionally. And what happens is when we look at Isaac and how the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob didn't really engage in Jacob's destiny. Jacob was a soft-hearted person. Esau was a hunter. His dad was more drawn to the hunter and did not pour into Jacob. So Jacob had to wrestle to find out who God said he was. We as parents in faith, we get the opportunity to ask God, what did he put in our kids? What do I have to do? What can I intentionally do? What will the boy's rule of life be? And what is his work? What is it? How can I steer him so he will know you? It's intentional. The final thing that I want to hit on there is inheritance. And this inheritance thing is a big deal because this is where we get the head starts of life. And again, some of us in this room, you are the first generation to know God. Great, you're building an inheritance. Some of us feel like our life has just been so blessed and so easy, and we don't know that we're walking in an inheritance. We didn't realize that that was the case. And so there's this thing that they call the 5-generation rule. And essentially, psychologists will map this out. They've been doing it for quite some time. That your life and the decisions of your life, the actions of your life affect directly 5 generations following you. The way you handle life, the way you speak, the way you live affects 5 generations following you. And how this first started, how people started studying this is so interesting because it goes back to this story of prisons in the 1700s. Super fun places. And if we could just put up that picture, the 2 men, I'm going to tell you a little bit of story about these. How many have heard the story of Max Jukes and Jonathan Edwards? Anybody? Some have, some haven't. If you haven't, this is going to blow your mind. But it was a foundation for revelation on how families work and how generations impact the next. These 2 men lived about the same time in the 1700s. And it started off that there was a guy who was in the prison system, like working in the prison system, in the 1800s, 1870s, and he was working and he was going to different prisons, and whatever his job was a little bit more like leadership. And as he started going to the prisons and he started comparing notes and comparing prisoners and their histories and whatever, he found out that 42 of the current inmates in different prisons all shared the same great-great-grandpa. Max Jukes, in case you couldn't tell. Max Jukes was the great-great-grandpa. And so this led to this question of how many other people in the prison system are connected to this guy. What's the tie? How did this happen? Why would this possibly be? And when they started connecting his family lines and they checked it down for 5 generations, they found this. These guys are really into it. That's awesome. We should do this every Sunday. Some of the grown-ups should be up here. Yeah, the fun ones are. They're on the front row doing it. Okay, so they started chasing him and they found out, they're like, what is the story with Max? Well, Max is this guy, he lived in around the New York area, and he was just a generally all-around bad dude. He was a womanizer, he was a cheat, he was homeless as far as they could tell. He kind of just drifted everywhere. He robbed people. He had 11 kids by all different mamas, and so it was a bit of a mess, and so we know that the family dynamic was a little challenged and a little broken. And when they started digging down his family line, can we just pop up the stats on that? Mr. Jukes. Of his descendants, 310 of the 1,200 were professional paupers, which means beggars and people that just took handouts. More than 1 in 4. So there's 1,200 total, his descendants. The other guy had 1,400. 300 of the 1,200, 1 in 4, died in infancy from lack of good care and good conditions. 50 women who lived lives of notorious debauchery. They were prostitutes. That's like such a fancy way of saying that. 400 men and women were physically wrecked early by their own wickedness. 7 were murderers. 60 were habitual thieves who spent on average 12 years each in lawlessness. And 130 criminals who were convicted more or less often of crime. So in effect, the entire family line, not just the biological kids, but the ones that married the biological kids, they just had a series of mess. So they checked, this guy who's like studying it comes in, the book, if you want to look it up, it's from A.E. Winship, called A Study in Education and Heredity. In the 1900s, when they started digging into it, they found that there was a couple people that were studying this. They found this other guy who was in about the same area, lived in about the same area, had the same starting point, you know, as far as he's the same age, same time. He had 11 children, but with his wife. He was a Puritan pastor and a teacher, and he was just like a lover of Jesus. And they followed down his 5 generations, and this is what they found. 1 U.S. vice president, 3 U.S. senators, 3 governors, 3 mayors, 13 college presidents, 30 judges, 65 professors, 80 public office holders, 11 lawyers, 100 missionaries, pastors, and theologians. That was his family line. So some of us, we just feel like, man, our life is just blessed. Could it be that somebody in one of the generations before you laid some good seed? Could it be that somebody in a generation before you sought God and has been praying for you? It might not even be your direct parents. It might be grandmas and grandpas, aunties or uncles. Somebody, could it be that the life that you're living is not just that you made good choices, but could it be that you're led more towards good choices because of what has been planted in your family line? This is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And we know by the time Jacob had to wrestle things through with God, he was considered a cheat and a swindler. But he was really anchored into the line of faith. And he found his way back to wrestle through with God. So some of us, we want to look at this and we want to go, okay, God, either what have I been blessed with and how do I intentionally pass it on to the next generation? How do I intentionally sow the seeds? How do I intentionally make sure that I see what God put in them so they will find a way to love you in it? How do I intentionally do it? Or we might be the ones that we're like, man, my family sounds like that guy's family. We're that screwed up. It was that bad. You should meet my mama. Like that. Like some of us are feeling that way, right? And you're like, oh, what hope is there for me? Brand new beginnings. It starts somewhere. So those of us who have inherited a long line of faith, we need to be diligent to guard it and sow it, that we pour it into our kids. Those of us that are building first or second or third generations, we need to be intentional about how we handle this. And we need to recognize that even though I'm wrestling through, even though I'm walking into freedom and it seems harder for me than it does for some people, even though I'm the first generation that might actually get to buy a property or have a car or be drug-free or what, maybe I'm the first generation. But I'm walking through this for the generations behind me too. There's something, and that's why it's hard, because the enemy of our soul wants to keep us in that first picture. He wants us to stay in that line, but God's like, you can be the one who's in the next line. Something new can start. I heard a story just the other day of Pastor Ray Johnson. He's from Southern California. He pastors a church of 20,000 people that he founded, which is mind-blowing to me. And he founded the church. He came into faith as an adult. And he's telling the story about how when he was a kid, his dad, they were in the movie world, and so his dad was actually in media and films and was a really successful businessman, really out there accomplishing a bunch of things. And he said when he was about 10 years old and had 2 little sisters, his dad all of a sudden just started drinking and like rage drinking. And so his dad would drink and yell and drink and yell. So his mom, to cope, kept up her end of it, and she drank too. So they both become what he calls rageaholics and alcoholics and just fought and fought. And he says he remembers at nighttime, they would be in bed and all of a sudden the fighting would start and things would be thrown across rooms and his little sisters would come into his bedroom and he would pop off the screen and the window and the 3 little kids would climb out the window and go walk the streets until when they came home they heard quiet and then they would sneak back into the house and go to sleep. And he said he actually thought that was normal. Didn't know any other way of being. But it wasn't until he was much older and his grandma was moving into a new home and they were emptying out her house. And he helped, was packing up drawers and he pulled out a drawer and he found this box and there was newspaper clippings in there about his grandpa. And all he knew is that his grandpa had died young and their family had been a bit of a mess. But it told the story of how his grandpa was a judge. A court judge. He'd been in the war, World War I actually, and came home and nobody understood PTSD or anything else like that. So they just sent everybody home with opioids and learned to cope. And when his grandpa hit a certain point where his dad was 10 years old. So same thing. Grandpa took his life. He didn't know. He'd never heard that story about his grandpa, but he started to realize something happened when my dad was 10 years old. Something happened when I was 10 years old. I'm about to have kids that are 10 years old. We're not doing that. And so he came to Christ, and he actually said he loves the local church for this reason. It was the first time he ever heard people say you could have a new family line. He said it was the first time I ever heard people say, you know, you can take that family tree and just chop it off at the roots and start fresh. We're not talking about excommunicating all your family, you understand? I'm just saying, as far as what you have to draw on for your future, you can be grafted into the line of Jesus. And there's freedom in that. He said in his family line, once he started digging into it, he found out he could trace his family tree back 140 years. Aunties, uncles, cousins, you know, all the people in his family line for 140 years, not one single successful marriage. Not one. But he's been married to his wife for 42 years now. So there's an important reality that we need to understand. I might have a generational line of faith that I can pull on, or I might be the one who's starting the generational line. But God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, is looking at you. He's looking at your kids. He's looking at your grandkids, and he's looking on down, and he's saying, I have a plan, and you're going to see me best when you see it all together. When you see my faithfulness here, you see my faithfulness there, you see my faithfulness there. See, God calls us into these new beginnings. How many of you are believing that you are the start of a new family line? Yeah, a fresh beginning. And those of us who have inherited a nice, more faith-based, more faith-anchored family line, we need to understand that we need to guard it, that we need to protect it, that we need to be intentional, that we can't just assume that the next generation just knows it because. They know it because we teach them, because we model them. And so today as we consider this, and tomorrow, surprise, it's Heritage Day, and as you consider your heritage, consider not just what you've inherited, but consider what you're leaving behind. Consider the legacy that you're building for the generations yet to come. And so, Lord, today we thank you for your faithfulness. We thank you that you are the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And God, we thank you for this room full of families today, full of life, full of fresh beginnings. We thank you for the new babies, and we thank you for those who have lived decades. And God, that for all of us it is true. You are faithful and you are good. And I thank you, Lord, for breaking generational curses. I thank you that generational ties that are broken and damaged don't have to be the truth for our future. And so, God, today I speak blessing over these families. I speak blessing and life and hope. Help us to intentionally live the life that you plan for us in Jesus' name. Amen.